Welcome back to Best Practices for Alyvix. So far in our series, we look at how to create a new test case from scratch, how to mark up the components on a screen grab, how to use Designer's component tree and component options, and using steps in the selector panel. Today, we'll look at the scripting panel to see the best practices for turning our marked up steps into a user agent that runs through a predefined task on the user interface. We'll also look at the Monitor and Console tabs. The steps we create in Selector are the building blocks for our user agent scripts. As we saw last time, we can drag a step to a specific place in the script or use the Add button to append it to the bottom of the script. But there are actually 3 different scripts, and here we're looking at the main script, which you can tell by the tab title. Clicking on a script title is enough to switch the panel to show that script. Once a node is added, you can select or deselect multiple nodes with the usual Windows Control, Alt, and Shift combinations. The blue bars at the left indicate those nodes that are currently selected. Note that you can use a given selector step as often as you want as a node. So you can sometimes be more efficient by reusing a single step as many times as necessary in a test case. Many test cases, especially simple ones, will just execute a series of steps on the application interface. The black run block indicates a node will just do the simplest possible thing. Check that all the components match the current screen. And if they do, carry out all the component actions belonging to that step. But there are also other types of nodes that behave differently than run. To switch the node type, double-click on the black block. If I do it now, it changes to if true and adds a second clause marked run. You then need to drag the second step to the newly added red box. You can probably guess that this is a conditional, with Alyvix steps as both the if and then arguments. If the components of the if part match the current interface, it doesn't execute its actions as it normally would, but instead runs the second then step. The second step is then treated normally, as if it were the only step. There isn't any other relationship between the two. A perfect example of when to use if true is a privacy pop-up on a website, and not just because the pop-up might or might not be on screen. Sometimes resolving the condition involves multiple steps, which we can do with a single conditional having a section as the argument, as we'll see in the next video. Note that it's likely these conditional cases shouldn't be measured, so think about unticking the measure box. If false does the same, but only if the first step doesn't match the current interface. If false can be helpful when you need to fix a setting that might be wrong, like window size or dark mode. For instance, with browsers, it's best practice to maximize at startup because they have command line parameters. But for an app without that, use if false to maximize. You can also use them in combination, one following the other, when you need to have some action happen, but exactly what depends on the circumstances. Continuing to double-click on the node type, we'll cycle between the 3 types. The scripting panel has 3 of its own actions at the bottom left. After selecting one or more scripting nodes, clicking on the Disable Enable button will exclude or include those nodes the next time the script runs. The gray color shows which nodes have been disabled. Obviously, Remove will remove a node from the script, but it won't be removed from the set of steps in Selector below. Finally, Run Selection will run the currently selected scripted steps as if they were the only steps in the script. The other steps will be skipped as if disabled. However, if a named section shown in the scripting management panel is called by one of the selected steps, that section will be run as normal. The scripting panel isn't the only panel in the center. Switching to the Monitor tab shows the screen grab associated with the current step. This panel lets you see the markup on top of the screen grab without having to go into edit mode. It also lets you see the markup at the same time as the component tree, so you can see the graphic components and the actions at the same time. Since you can only see a small part of the screen grab, use one or more of the Hide buttons to maximize the visible space. The third panel, named Console, shows the results of the most recent run, whether it's a test case, single step, or a group of steps. The run report lists the steps with measured values, each beginning with a timestamp. The report starts with test case name starts and ends with test case name ends, followed by the resulting state, OK or failed, and the total running time for the entire test case. In between, each step whose measure flag is set in Selector will report its resulting state, detected if successful and failed if not. That's followed by the amount of time needed just for that step, and the precision in seconds. Note that you shouldn't measure every step in a test case. Many steps are purely for interaction and navigation in the interface and don't need to be measured. For instance, if a step is always instantaneous, it will always show up as 0 seconds in the report. So the data won't be usable in any later analysis and will just take up space. In the last video, we saw it's best practice to give your steps appropriate names. This also makes reading the results report much easier. A slightly different type of console output will appear when a section or map step runs, but that will be in the next best practices video. When there is a failure because the timeout was reached, the console output will also include a screenshot showing what was displayed on screen at that moment. Recall that as a step is being executed, Alyvix goes down the component tree in order to see whether each component matches or not. Later, for each matched component, Alyvix will show that component's markup on the current screen grab from this run. But for the last check before a timeout, the markup will change if the first non-matching component is a subcomponent. So instead, you'll see an empty box corresponding to the region of interest and a large exclamation point in the middle. This exclamation point indicates the location of the first missing component, or the highest one in the component tree. You should next compare that location on the failure screenshot to the same location on the original screen grab. When instead the first non-matching component is a top-level component, you won't see the exclamation point at all. So if you see a failure with no component marked as the failure point, look for the first top-level component on the screen grab that's not marked. We'll look in more detail at how Alyvix handles both failed and successful script completions in the next best practices video. Here, though, is a repeat of the best practices from today. See you soon for part 6 in this series.